to remind you of the usual social distancing, though in this room today it looks like it's just myself. But moving on then for a brief overview of the day's business. The committee will consider subordinate legislation, briefing from the Road Haulage Association, departmental briefing on Renewable Low Carbon Energy review, and consideration of committee legacy report. To advise members, as some members are joining the meeting remotely, it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register that they wish to ask questions at each agenda item. Also, if members could mute their mics when they are not speaking, that would allow everyone to hear evidence following the meeting. Okay. Item 1 is apologies, and there's apologies for the chair, who is unfortunately ill. No others received, Jim?
No other apologies, Chair.
George Robinson may be with us. His wife's in this morning, so he may join us later on.
Sorry, apologies from Padraig Delargy as well, Chair.
Padraig Delargy, okay. Thank you. Item 2 is Chairman's business. I don't have any business brought to my attention on that item. Item 3 is the draft minutes.
Sorry, Chair, there was something, I think, under Chairperson's business. If I can find it. There's a letter, correspondence at page 5.
Okay.
Sorry, it wasn't in the Chair's brief. It's a suggested joint letter to the Minister from the chairs of the PSC and this committee.
Okay.
For the committee's agreement.
The committee need to agree that letter?
Yes,
today.
the PSC has already agreed it.
The AC have agreed it and their chair has signed it. So are we happy with the letter at page 5, you say, yeah?
Yep.
Any commentary or on it, or are we happy to agree it? Is silence agreement?
Mr. Chairman, a number of us are on both committees, which have both had an interest in planning. Certainly, this committee, the Infrastructure Committee, has an overall responsibility for planning at a high level, and the PAC's had an investigation into planning, so that's why the letter has come from them. Where a number of difficulties have been highlighted, and there was unanimous support at the Public Accounts Committee that we would raise our concerns, but given this committee's responsibility, I think it's important that we too have an input into it. I personally think it's a reasonably balanced letter and it is appropriate, and I'm content with it.
You're content. Content, members?
Content.
Thank you. Okay. Item 3 then is the draft minutes at page 7 of the meeting on the 9th of March 2022. Are members content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting? Agreed? Agreed, okay. Therefore, since this is the last meeting of the committee, we would then seek agreement of the committee that the sign-off of the minutes at today's meeting takes place when they are drafted by probably myself today or else the chairman in the days ahead. But are you happy enough that that matter be left at that situation where with no further meetings to pass the minutes?
Well, we don't know if there's something controversial going to happen. Do we circulate it in advance to members and then allow yourselves to finalise it?
Yep, that sounds reasonable. Yes, it's circulated to everybody then. Anybody?
Chair,
yes, sorry.
Can I just come in on the draft minutes there? It's Cara here. Just in the minutes there, I had to leave last week as well during the climate change debate to be in the chamber, and that's not reflected in the minutes. Thank you.
Okay. We can amend that accordingly then. The minutes were agreed obviously there a few minutes ago. So, okay.
Fine, Chair. So if members are content, the minutes will be amended and reissued for signing.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you. Matters arising from those minutes of the 9th of March. Any members, any issues that they wish to raise? At page 21, there's outstanding committee requests for information, just for your attention. Okay, no members raising anything on item 4, correspondence. Draw members' attention to the memo at page 30 and tabled at page 3. Is the committee content with actions as suggested in the correspondence memo?
Yeah.
Great, okay, thank you. We move then to item 6, which is subordinate legislation, SL1s, not subject to assembly proceedings. Advise members that there are 6 proposals for statutory rules not subject to assembly proceedings at page 156. SL1, the Road Races Spalmount Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2022. SL1, the Road Races Kern Castle Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2022. SL1, the Road Races Drumhort Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2022. And the SL1, the Road Races North West 200 Order, Northern Ireland 2022. The SL1 Road Races Tyrone Stages of Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2022. And finally, the SL1, the Road Races Maiden City Stages Rally Order, Northern Ireland 2022. Are members content with those SL1s?
Yeah, content.
Thank you. Item 7 is subordinate legislation, SRs, not subject to assembly proceedings. And would advise members that there are 4 proposals for statutory rules not subject to assembly proceedings at page 169. SR 2022 93, the private access on the A6 Castle Dawson bypass stopping up order, Northern Ireland 2022. SR 2022 94, the Road Races Craigantlet Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2022. SR 2022 95, the Road Races Tandragee 100 Order, Northern Ireland 2022. And the SR 2022 96, the Parking Places on Roads, Castle Place, Belfast Order, Northern Ireland 2022. Are members content with those SRs not subject to assembly proceedings?
Content, sure.
Yeah, thank you. Item 8 is an SR 2022, number 66, the Fennel, Bangor, the Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2022. At page 195, the Statutory Rule. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 23rd of February 2022 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. The examiner of statutory rules has considered the statutory rule and has no issues to raise. Are members content with this rule?
Content.
Content, thank you. So I'll read the motion that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2022-66, the Fennel Bangor Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and has no objection to the rule. Agreed. Item 9, the SR 2022-97, the Derry Nasser Road, Rumble Road, Oma Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2022. At page 205 is the statutory rule. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 2nd of March 2022 and was content the rule was subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee, and the examiner of statutory rules has considered the statutory rule has no issues to raise. Are members content with this rule?
Content.
Thank you. We'll read in the motion then that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered the Derry Nasser Road, Rumble Road, Oma Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2022, and has no objection to the rule. Agreed. We move to item 10 then, which is our first presentation of this morning, and it's the Road Haulage Association. And we'll just take a few minutes to let the guys get into the room here.
Chair, just one thing, please.
All right. Cathal, yes?
Sorry, Chair, I missed the start of the meeting. Apologies. Could I record Padraig Delargy's apologies for this morning's meeting? Yes, and we asked it. Thank you.
Yes, I think Kim had already done, or Liz did.
Thank you.
Had already done
Thank
that.
you, Chair.
Okay. Have we Mark Tate coming in fast started?
He was there earlier.
Checking it here.
Yep.
Yep, Mark's there, okay. You're very welcome, gentlemen. We welcome Mr. John Martin, the RHA Policy Manager, Northern Ireland, and Peter Somerton, the Managing Director of Macula Ireland Limited. And attending via Starleaf is Mark Tate, the Director of Target Transport Limited. Gentlemen, you're very welcome this morning, and as usual format, if you'd like to give us some opening remarks, and then members will want to ask some questions. Yeah?
Okay, I'll go first. Firstly, I would wish to thank the Chair and the Committee for inviting us here today to update you in relation to the transport and logistics sector. My apologies for not being able to attend last week. I was attending the opening of McCullough Ireland's biodigester plant in Lisburn. I also want to offer apologies on behalf of Paul Jackson, one of the directors of McBurney Transport. Paul has had to attend an urgent meeting this morning in Dublin, so will not be able to participate.
Thank you.
Society in general, and the transport sector particularly, has been through the middle since March 2020. The coronavirus pandemic, Brexit, Ireland stroke the Northern Ireland Protocol, driver shortages, and now escalating fuel and energy prices. The sector has worked tirelessly throughout these difficult times to provide an essential service, and despite the problems they've faced, we should be rightly proud to see convoys of Irish trucks heading east to provide vital supplies to our friends in the Ukraine region, and including McCullough Transport has participated in them convoys. So I think just to highlight that, what the sector's doing. We wish to cover off three key areas today that cause the sector considerable difficulties. Those three areas are fuel costs, the Ireland stroke Northern Ireland Protocol, and driver shortages. So we'll start initially in relation to fuel costs. The current and increasing cost of fuel for road transport. There are two key elements to this. The first one is the increasing cost of diesel as a consequence of the war in the Ukraine has seen an increase since last week from £1.30 per litre, excluding VAT, to around £1.52 per litre. That's a 21.5 pence increase per litre, or 16%. The average UK diesel price prior to the war was £1.18 per litre, excluding VAT. So it has increased to the tune of 34 pence per litre, or just under 30% of an increase. And to put these figures into context and to illustrate the impact this has on the sector and the overall economy, for every 1 pence per litre increase, it adds an additional cost of between £400 and £450 per year for the operation of a 44-tonne truck. If you look at the overall increase since February of 34 pence, that equates to between £14,000 and £15,000 per truck of an increase in costs in the bottom line. I have consulted some members in relation to how these estimated costs impact on their businesses if the fuel cost doesn't decrease. The first company is a fairly large company, and their estimated costs on their business is between £4.2 and £4.5 million, and ultimately that has to be passed on to the consumer. The second company, slightly smaller company, but just to balance it, the cost for them is between £1.4 and £1.5 million. So say these costs have to be passed on to consumer. Logistics is a very tight margin industry, and they can't absorb these costs. I'll give you some interesting facts in relation to fuel that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily appreciate. For every 2 miles a truck travels down the road, it uses 1 litre of diesel. And for every litre of diesel, if you're buying it at £1.70 per litre at the pumps, 59.95 pence of that is duty and 19 pence of that is VAT. The ordinary consumer can't claim the VAT back, the businesses can. So a considerable amount of the fuel that you pay for is tax. The second element in relation to fuel is the proposed changes to the use of red diesel. A lot of people don't see this as affecting the haulage industry, but in actual fact it does. So subject to the nature of your business operation will determine the impact that this will have on your costing framework. As everybody knows, Northern Ireland has a fairly successful agri-food sector where we export and import a lot of foodstuffs. The majority of these products are transported in a chilled or frozen condition using specialised vehicles. And these vehicles are powered by engines, or the fridges on these vehicles are powered by engines that run at the moment on red diesel. There is no alternative to fuel in these vehicles. You have to use diesel. There's no alternative. The current rate of duty in red diesel is 11.4 pence per litre. Therefore, with the change from the use from red to white, the duty will rise from 11 pence up to 58 pence roughly. That's a 420% increase in the costs. Make no mistake, and despite what the government say, this is not about the environment. It's about revenue generation, as fridge trailers used for international logistics or GB, Island of Ireland logistics, cannot be powered by any other means. For an HGV operator using refrigerated trailers, this will increase their operating costs by roughly £100 per week per trailer, or £5,200 per annum per trailer. Again, I've consulted members just to get an insight into the actual impact this will have on the bottom line. One of the larger operators in Northern Ireland, it'll increase their operating costs to the tune of £1.7 million. And for a smaller operator, it increases their operating costs to the tune of £350,000. Again, this has to be passed on to the consumer, so the end user ends up paying the price of this additional tax. And this is a tax, it's not an environmental issue, it's purely a tax. What is the RHA doing? Well, the RHA have lobbied the UK government with 3 key asks to address the issue in relation to fuel. The first one is a freeze on fuel duty for a minimum of at least 2 years. The second ask is the introduction of an essential road user duty rebate scheme for lorry and coach operators. This is something that we'd welcome the committee's support on because at the end of the day, trucks are vital to the economy and trucks are vital to consumers. Without trucks, nothing moves. And the third ask is to either scrap or delay the proposed changes to the ban on the use of red diesel in certain vehicles and plant equipment. Again, given that we're part of an all-island economy, particularly operators around the border areas will suffer considerably as a consequence of this new rule. Second thing I want to cover is the Brexit and Ireland/Northern Ireland Protocol. There are 5 key concerns from the logistics sector in relation to where we find ourselves. The first one is bureaucracy. Second, cost. Third, time. Fourth one is the environmental impact. And the fifth one, last but no means least, is the sector fatigue. And just to be clear at the outset, the RHA are not pro or anti-Brexit or the protocol. We have been consistent in our message from day one that there were structural problems with the protocol, and we are now glad to see that everybody appears to have moved onto our page with an acceptance of the issues. And that includes the Commission and other trade bodies who were initially saying that there were no issues or no concerns. Our basic ask is that we ensure the free movement and unrestricted movement of goods between our main market, GB, and Northern Ireland. However, the fact that almost all goods which are moving from GB to Northern Ireland are currently defined as at risk, with customs declarations and SPS paperwork being required, means that the protocol in its current format is undermining many Northern Ireland businesses. Simply put, goods shipped from GB which will remain in Northern Ireland or those that will return to GB should not be subject to EU paperwork, digital information requirements, tariffs or checks. Now, there is a big play being made in relation to the reduction of checks at the ports. Checks is not the major issue. It's the requirement to complete the paperwork and all the other information in the back office that is the key issue. Without all that being required, then you don't need any checks in any case. The protocol in its current format has some advantages, and we are not asking these to be lost. However, it has also disadvantages, especially for hauliers and those businesses who cannot take advantage of the EU sales opportunities it may present. Given the disruption to the supply chain, vehicles are not taking the shortest route to market, with Northern Irish vehicles not being routed through Southern Ireland and Southern Irish vehicles being routed through the Northern Ireland. This adds time, cost, delays to just-in-time deliveries, fatigue for drivers and business staff, reduction in logistics capacity, and increased impact on the environment. There are two key elements that I just want to briefly focus on. The first one is cost. We have already received confirmation from Her Majesty's Government that both the government-supported schemes, the TSS scheme and the Movement Assistance Scheme, will cease in 2023-2024, and the full costs will have to be borne by either traders or hauliers. I've consulted with some members on the anticipated impact from a cost perspective for retail movements or hospitality. As an example, the average retail load requires 18 export health certificates. These are certificates issued by vets as a consequence of requirements from the EU in relation to the movement of SPS products. The cost of these certificates is roughly £200. The government will cover the cost of £200 per export health certificate. One of the businesses moves in the region of 5,000 loads per annum from GB to Northern Ireland, requiring 18 export health certificates per load. When the government MAS scheme ends, these movements will need in total 90,000 export health certificates under the current SPS arrangements. This one business alone, a cost of £18 million will have to be met by someone in order to cover this. The government is currently covering it, but someone will have to cover that cost going down the tracks. And this is only one business, so it is. Who pays this? I tell you who. It's you, it's me, it's the consumer and the public. Consider if this was one of the larger supermarkets who currently benefit from the easements that we have in place, and we welcome the easements, and the cost that they will have to pay whenever the easements end and we have full implementation of the protocol. We have heard already many GB-based businesses who have stopped moving goods from GB to Northern Ireland as a consequence. That will increase as opposed to decrease. You may be aware that despite the UK government and the EU assuring everyone we were in a standstill period because of negotiations, enforcement of the rules was actually enhanced a few weeks ago in Belfast Port, without anybody actually being told that the rules were being enforced more rigorously. We challenged this and we were successful in getting them to draw back from the enhanced enforcement of these rules. People must appreciate logistics operates in the round between GB and Northern Ireland. Logistics is highly efficient, highly agile and low profit margin business. These folks are the lifeblood of the Northern Irish economy. We had hoped that the coronavirus pandemic had made everyone realise how critical logistics was to the economy. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to have happened. The logistics supply chain within the UK is circular, fully integrated, just in time, highly efficient, highly agile, low profit margin business. And whenever I say circular, for every load that comes out, a load comes back. The price of sending a truck to GB and bringing it back again has to be borne by the cost that the haulier gets for taking the load out and the cost that he gets for bringing it back. If he doesn't get the load back, the full cost of the movement from GB to from Northern Ireland to GB and back again has to be borne by the product that's going out. So we need circular movement of haulage. The last issue that we have is driver shortages. There has been a driver of HGV drivers for an extended period, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic, new trading arrangements and difficulties experienced particularly around northern French ports with migrants attempting to gain access to vehicles. As a consequence, some of the older drivers have decided either to hang up their boots or to stay local. In addition, the sector has experienced difficulties attracting younger drivers due to the long hours, rigorous enforcement of the driver's hours regulations, and people not wanting to stay away from home. In addition to that, some insurance companies are reluctant to insure drivers who are under 25 years of age or don't have 2 years' experience. By the time most people come to the age of 25, they've already got a career, so logistics misses out as a consequence of that. We have to welcome DVA's renewed focus on increasing the capacity in relation to HGV driving tests. This is more than welcome. HGV licence holders has remained steady over this last 5 years with in the region of 50,000 drivers. But it's interesting to note whenever I reviewed the DVA figures that the number of vocational driving licence holders renewals for the over 70-year-olds has reached a new record high in Q1 of 2021 at just over 3,000. That's a worrying trend, and it indicates that we have an ageing driver population, and the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to get for the sector. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay, John, thank you. Peter, you were still in at this stage?
Yes, first of all, Chair, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'll give a brief introduction to our company and what we do, and then I'll take one of John's subjects, and that is the Northern Ireland Protocol, and just do a skim over the surface to allow the committee to do a deep dive on any issues that they would like to do. First of all, McCulloch Ireland is a haulage company that services the internal Irish market, GB market, and crosses the Irish Sea from our depots in Dublin to Holyhead and from our Lisburn and Mollusk depots across all the northern Irish Sea routes. Our business is moving goods across the Irish Sea. That gives us a unique insight into not the protocol in terms of looking backwards, but the protocol in terms of looking forwards, because we can see what the EU third country frontier really looks like whenever we look at the impact it has on our GB to Republic of Ireland operations. So if you like, we are not using a crystal ball in terms of how we model forward. We've seen it now for 12 months. The Ireland-Northern Ireland Protocol has become an increasingly sensitive issue for the logistics sector to comment on, as it's become politicised strongly due to the constitutional challenges it brings up. We're logistics businesses, we're not politics businesses, so for the last 20 months we've been calling this out as logistics and not politics, both for movements between Britain and Northern Ireland and Britain and the Republic of Ireland. We've become the very front line, feeling the pain at the ports, but this is really only the tip of the iceberg. Most of the issues come whenever you're actually trying to document and collect goods. And in fact, whenever we turn up at a port, effectively we're bringing somebody else's homework with us, and that is the exporter's homework for the port to examine. These issues we have to resolve at collection points, which has a massive impact on the efficiency of the turn of trucks. Before the protocol, we simply turned up at a GB collection point with the nearest available truck and trailer and collected the load and planned it onto whatever the next sailing we could cost effectively get the product onto. Now things have to be planned days in advance. Trailer numbers have to be locked down days in advance for documentation to be prepared, and inadvertently with all the paperwork, and I've brought with me paperwork which is for one load, just to demonstrate to people the number of signatures, the number of stamps, the number of difficulties that there are in bringing product across the Irish Sea. Many of those issues are well documented. My comment has always been that we're trying to apply international legislation to what is a regional economy. This legislation is designed, and the EU third country rules are designed around the movement of bulk commodities, single lines of beef, a single line of pork, moving on international shipments, whenever you get down to the last few miles of the distribution cycle, which is effectively what happens between GB distribution centres in Northern Ireland, there are so many products on the load and there are so many complexities around those products, you end up with a scenario where Belfast Port has more physical and documentary checks than Rotterdam. At the minute, there are easements in place, and I would like to comment on some of the easements just to demonstrate how difficult some of the protocol issues are. We're coming up on the first anniversary on the 1st of April for when retail loads were supposed to have been covered by the Northern Ireland Protocol, and the easements were supposed to end. So 1 year on, the retail sector is still operating under easements from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. And that in a way hides from public view the impact that the trade restrictions actually have. Many of our customers aren't retail customers, they're ingredients customers, they're manufacturers, they're people who don't benefit from those schemes. So if you like, the full brunt has been borne on a minority of the trade, and that's something that we feel has been very unfair and has had a chilling effect on the amount of material moving between Britain and Northern Ireland, to the extent that in terms of the circular movements of haulage across the Irish Sea, we're seeing a reduction in the number of loads and the demand for loads moving between Britain and Northern Ireland, whilst we have still a strong demand out of Northern Ireland. So this is actually going to, in the long run, hurt our Northern Ireland exports, because it's going to increase the cost of freight from Northern Ireland out. Trader awareness was suggested as the cause of the early problems. It's worth noting that the trader awareness was challenged by the fact that the rules only came into play in December, in the middle of lockdown. The systems were only released to us in December, in the middle of a lockdown, and it was nearly impossible to get the information out to people regarding the movements between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Those challenges are still there because there's continual changes in terms of what the EU would like to see impact. I would like to comment on one of those. We had a truck that was stopped on, I'll just grab the dates, on the 19th of February this year. It was a similar movement to what we had done several times. It was a load of New Zealand and Australian lamb product. And we couldn't understand why, during standstill, this load was actually stopped. So we actually said, there's a standstill, what has changed? And the person at the port told us that we have received, and I quote directly, we have received this instruction last week. Perhaps the rule was there before, but it was not so clearly explained as it is in the note for guidance now. I believe this is a trade issue, the intention being to avoid meat being imported into GB from another third country to be distributed into the EU. This could result in an advantage for GB in trade negotiations. We were really concerned at this because we seen this as SPS legislation effectively being used to curb trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that's what our business is, moving product from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. I asked the Northern Ireland food supply chain, which has got DAERA, DEFRA and HMRC in it, on the 24th of February if anything had changed. And I was told nothing had changed. So I then went back to a senior DAERA official and raised the question directly with him. And he responded by telling me that the EU Commission have confirmed that the movement of rest of the world products, such as New Zealand lamb, into GB and then into NIEU is prohibited unless the consignment is further processed in GB. Whilst we have refused entry to unprocessed rest of the world consignments, we are still permitting the movement of rest of the world processed products through GB, providing that they are certified and accompanied by the old version of the meat AHC. At this stage, I cannot confirm how long this trade will be permitted to continue for. That's a major implication on movement of products between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That effectively could affect thousands of retail products on our shelves. I highlighted the issue to our trade body, and myself and John directly engaged with DEFRA on this issue. terms of the communication with DEFRA, it was raised in the 3rd of March. Sorry, I'll get my right date. Yeah, it was raised in the 3rd of March supply chain meeting, and DEFRA confirmed that the EU had taken this position. And I challenged back on that, and I basically asked the question, how in a standstill can we see an increased rule, and has anybody considered the impact of this rule on retail goods coming into Northern Ireland? Effectively, we've got a U-turn from DEFRA where these products, and I quote from the legislation that they sent us, are allowed to continue during the negotiation period. But I have to caution that this is a real challenge if this is the landing ground for GB to NI trade, because if this is actually what comes out of the negotiations and we end up with the EU actually that legislation being run as it's quoted, it will have a major impact on the cost of goods and the ability of range of goods in Northern Ireland. We've also asked how was this signed off, and we'll be interested to hear from anybody at DERA or DEFRA as to what UK minister or NI minister actually signed off this change in the rules whilst we're in standstill. I'll be clear, this was not communicated to traders. The first time we knew that this rule was changed was whenever a truck was stopped at the port and a TARP notice was served in order to return it back. So that's one of the key issues that we have. We also ask forward, and we ask for guidance from the Infrastructure Committee and from DERA as to the movement of goods between the Republic of Ireland, which is something we do, and Great Britain. Whenever checks come into play in Holyhead, which are scheduled to be there for the 1st of July, we have seen normally checks resulting in a diversion of trade to find the easiest route. In other words, whenever checks were put in place on Calais on the land bridge, Holyhead started to take the easy route of direct sailings between the Republic of Ireland and the European mainland. Whenever we've seen checks in place in Dublin, we've seen product moving through Northern Ireland rather than through Dublin to avail of some of the beneficial easements that are in Northern Ireland. Whenever we see checks in place in Holyhead moving the other way, we would have to expect the same thing to happen, and that would be Republic of Ireland goods to channel through the northern ports. And the big challenge for hauliers is, how will that be documented? At the minute, Northern Irish product requires no documentation at all to move between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Effectively, it's unfettered trade. However, if Republic of Ireland goods are also coming through Northern Ireland, we'll have to find a way of documenting Northern Ireland goods, and that unfettered trade will actually be fettered. Effectively, what you'll have to do, and what we've been told by TSS, what we'll have to do is produce a passport for the Northern Ireland goods, just to prove the Northern Ireland goods don't need a passport. So there's a real challenge to trade here. There's a real consequence to Northern Ireland in terms of export costs, and there's a real challenge to the consumers in Northern Ireland in terms of availability of goods and the cost of those goods. I'll finish off by saying that there have been attempts to decouple the cost of living increases from the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I would challenge the political body in its entirety that any trade restrictions on what is the most cost-effective route for moving goods to Northern Ireland will only fuel that cost of living crisis. But if we remove effectively our ability to move goods on the most cost-effective route between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, effectively will increase the cost of those goods. At the minute we shop as a £70 million buying power, that will change to a £1.8 million buying power, and that will bring consequences to the retail shelves, to the hospitality industry, to the food service industry. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants to do a deeper dive in any of those.
Okay, Peter, thanks very much. Mark, do you want to add anything at this stage, or?
Yes, Chair, thank you very much for your time today. I'll just give myself a quick introduction. My name is Mark Tate. I'm the Managing Director, one of the directors of a small freight forwarding business, Target Transport Limited. I employ 3 people, so unlike our colleagues Peter there, and also our missing colleague today, Paul Jackson, who are large haulage operators, we're on the other end of the scale, so we're a very small specialised freight forwarding service. That being said, obviously, because we're small, in some respects, we feel the cost implications of what we go through at the minute, even possibly more acutely. I'm not saying that our colleagues don't feel the same pressures, but obviously when you don't have the resources behind you of additional personnel and obviously more financial resources, then obviously it puts additional cost pressures, and that's certainly a worry for us going forward. Obviously, John and Peter have stole some of my thunder and some of the issues I was going to discuss as well, but again, in terms of, I'll just follow on maybe from what Peter has said on I operate mainly through groupage and through fast parcel operators. We obviously do dedicated loads and stuff as well, but we're mainly a groupage and parcel operator, operating on behalf of our customers, technically as an agent. So the standstill period that we're in at the minute with the Northern Ireland Protocol makes it extremely difficult for us to plan ahead as to what is going to happen when these schemes end, like as John has alluded to, TSS and to MAS. Now, I don't really have much issues with the MAS scheme because it's not something we do a lot of. I just want to pick up on a few points in relation to TSS. I know I've documented this before to how I feel TSS is operated, and like as Peter alluded to, it's a global customs bulk shipping model implied on a small regional economy. It is not designed for groupage. It never was. I've had even TSS officials tell me when we first saw the model, as Peter said there back in December 2020, we asked them where is the groupage model for this system, and their argument was, well, what's groupage? They didn't know what groupage was. So, it was never designed for the mass movement of small, last mile single pallet shipments. Obviously, we were able to get some tweaks to that system, but it's still not perfect. And it works, yes, but it's I would call it maybe a workaround, and it's a necessary evil we have to work with. I just wanted to pick up on just some of the cost issues that John mentioned that TSS is going to be phased out. So if and when it's phased out, we're told 2023 into 2024. Obviously, then the customs procedures as they currently stand will have to be opened up to the private market. So the cost implications alone for myself, if the current arrangements for what currently happens from GB to the Republic of Ireland are replicated from GB to Northern Ireland, will be considerable. If I just give you some examples, so the average customs clearance fee at the moment of moving goods between GB and ROI per consignment is anywhere from £85 to £100 sterling for the customs declaration. That covers the export declaration from GB and the import declaration in the Republic of Ireland. So on average, if I say a pallet price at the minute to move a pallet, so small company moving one pallet from Birmingham to Belfast, at the minute £75, although maybe the next week the fuel price will have it up to £80, who knows. So when the TSS scheme ends, that government-funded scheme ends, that pallet in reality could become £175 to move from Belfast, from Birmingham to Belfast. At what point then does that small business say, look, this cost implication to me is too much for me to bring that product in? If I go somewhere else, either if I can't get in the Republic, do I have to go to France? Do I have to go to Germany? Do I have to go to Spain? So what's the cost implications there to bring it in from further afield? I'll give you some figures. If you take the average groupage load that comes in on a daily basis on a trailer, can be anywhere between 40 and 60 consignments. So if you replicate that cost of say £85 across 40 consignments, that's an extra cost of roughly £3,500 per trailer for those customs declarations if and when TSS is removed. Again, as John says, who pays for that? At the end of the day, the haulier can't absorb all those costs, so that's passed on to our customer, and ultimately it's passed on to the consumer. Even now, for us as a small company, I employ 3 people. At the minute, I don't have the resources of the larger companies to have a background staff of customs clearing agents. So what happens to me? What happens to my customers that don't have those facilities? It really is a worry for us that obviously going forward, at the minute we cannot basically cope with some of the processes we're doing, even under government-funded schemes. So if we go down the route of full customs processes, then it becomes extremely difficult for us. If we take on additional staff, there's a catch-22 because you employ somebody on the basis that you think you're going to get this work, but then again, if the customer can't afford it, they don't sell, they don't buy the product, we don't move the product, so therefore it's a catch-22. So it has a real worry going forward, probably from next year onwards, as to what will happen in the long run. again, we're in a standstill period. Nobody knows the solution, or nobody knows what's going on, because 6 months, 7 months, 8 months into EU-UK discussions, we have not had any real landing zone as to what is going to happen for the movement of goods from GB to NI. So we cannot plan ahead, and that's just stable in our industry. It's ahead, 6 month, 12 month, 24-month basis, and when you don't know the information, you can't plan. Again, as Peter alluded to there, that issue of NI to GB movements was confirmed to us in a DEFRA meeting in January, that we will have some form of customs process to complete on all NI to GB freight movements. Again, the reason we were informed of this is that it will only be in the Northern Ireland qualifying goods that will have unfettered access to GB, so not necessarily the Northern Ireland company selling them. So again, what does this mean in practice? It's likely that we will have to complete frontier declarations, safety security declarations, and again, this is an ongoing cost, not just to us, but then to the customer. Again, I listened, I'll make a point, I listened to the President of Logistics UK last week, and I'll ask the question that I think Manfred raised, where is the risk? Again, 15 months in on moving goods, where is the risk that we have seen with either food product or general commercial product? We can't find the risk at the minute, and we challenge anybody to tell us where is the risk. And again, from my point of view as a small company, I appreciate we're told we have the best of both worlds. And yes, by all means, if your business is selling in to the Republic of Ireland or further afield into EU, then by all means, the protocol has the advantages that you want. But at the minute, my business is primarily 85-90% on that GB-NI route, and it's extremely difficult for us to just flick a switch and just go somewhere else. So what do we do going forward? We're not too sure of that yet until we see where this landing zone is going to be. I think as Stephen Kelly noted there from Manufacturing NI, I think it was on one of the programmes that might have been viewed from Stormont, as he says, at the minute there's a lot of Northern Ireland companies feeling all the pain with no gain, and certainly from my point of view, that's how we feel at the minute. There were a few issues raised last week. I don't necessarily want to dive into them too much detail from Logistics UK in relation to parcels. Certainly I'll take any questions and go into them in greater detail. Just a few points I wanted to pick up on that were mentioned. As a freight forwarder, I use a lot of the fast parcel operators. I noted that Logistics UK noted that yes, they're legally correct in what they're saying, and that anything under £135 does not need a customs declaration. But in reality, in practice, like I use, and obviously I'm not going to mention names, but I use several of the very large fast parcel operators, and that is not the experience I've had. And basically from the 4th of January 2021, I'm completing full customs declarations. And I think that was noted in one of the questions that was raised last week as well. I'm completing full customs declarations on behalf of all of my customers for any freight that we move from GB to NI through any fast parcel operator that we use. And that is a full scope of customs declarations. We basically have to itemize every piece, every different commodity, every commodity code. You're uploading customs or commercial invoices. It can be a lengthy process. I have seen one. On some occasions, you might get an invoice that has maybe 30 or 40 lines on it. That takes time to upload. It is certainly time consuming. From my point of view, again, when the grace period, because parcels are currently operating under a grace period, and I know it's been raised by some of my customers, what happens when that grace period for parcels end? And again, we still don't have an answer, but if I look at what's going on in Dublin for freight going from GB to Dublin, say, because we do move freight from GB to Dublin through fast parcel operators. I have regularly seen freight, even up till now, 15 months later, being delayed 2, 3, 4 weeks in customs in Dublin. Now, it's not as bad as it was, say, 12 months ago, I'll give it that, but the average, if a customer asks me how long is it going to take, I say allow a week, but I says it could take longer. I says I have still seen some freight taking 10 to 14 days to clear customs in Dublin before it's delivered. So you take that into account into GB to NI movements. There's an awful lot more freight comes from GB to NI through the fast parcel operators. So it's an economy of scale. You scale up the movements, you scale up the customs processes. You then potentially have gridlock coming into the system. Again, potential delays are going to be inevitable if these customs procedures are implemented in full once the grace period for parcels ends as well. Again, I don't want to go into too much more depth. I'm certainly happy to take any questions, and obviously I appreciate it's now almost 11 o'clock, so time's moving on, so I certainly would appreciate if anybody wants to ask questions, we'll do our best to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and I think you've covered the subject very well there. And unfortunately, it seems to be a very worrying time ahead. A lot of concern here this morning in relation to the impact and effects of where we are at the minute. Just going on in order of raising things, John, you'd mentioned about the diesel and the refrigerated, trailers and whatnot and stuff. Is the red diesel or marked diesel allowed in EU as it currently sits, and can those trailers be brought into an area where potentially it's banned locally?
My understanding of it is, Chair, that the UK has went alone in relation to the outlawing of the use of rebated fuel in certain vehicles. So it is an approach that's adopted solely by the UK within Europe. Whenever it was first announced, I have been engaged with HMRC in relation to the implications, particularly in relation to companies such as McCullough or McBurney, who has bases both within Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. And after a lot of to and fro, HMRC have confirmed that if, for instance, McCullough have one of their refrigerated vehicles in the south of Ireland and they need to take on fuel to power the fridge unit, that they can fill that fridge unit with Southern Irish equivalent of red diesel, which ironically is green diesel, and provided they have the receipt, then there is no issue. So they can take on rebated fuel in the south of Ireland, and providing they have a receipt, if they're stopped by customs within the UK, then that's acceptable. The same would go, I assume, then for any other member state who sells rebated fuel. If you take on rebated fuel within your refrigerated unit in any country in Europe, then if that vehicle stopped in UK, providing you have a receipt or can prove that that fuel was taken on outside the UK, then it would be acceptable.
Obviously, we've spent a lot of time there on Brexit, the protocol situation currently, and again, a lot of worry and concerns that I can understand facing the industry through that system at the minute. It's the unknown quantity of everything. Peter, could you tell us maybe a wee bit more about the impact of the triangular trade and the SES controls? Where some people understand the EU is trying to mitigate, but that doesn't seem to be the case at all.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of triangular trade, to give a overview on what triangular trade as a term is, it is whenever goods move into Britain from either inside or outside the EU. Britain is then a third country to Northern Ireland, and then it travels from Britain on to Northern Ireland. So it's whenever imported goods come into Britain, and then those goods are re-exported effectively into Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland. That's referred to as triangular trade. What we've actually seen is that normal movements of goods in and around the month of February this year were affected by the EU directly, the Commission directly commenting to DERA on this specific piece of legislation. And I have the piece of legislation here. I also have the DEFRA commentary back on this as well. So what happened was that product from New Zealand and Australia, who also have SPS agreements with the EU, so this was not stopped for pest, disease or contaminants. There was no SPS issue. Were prohibited from coming into Northern Ireland, and the reason why we were given by the port was because it was a trade issue with the intention being to avoid meat being imported into Britain from another third country and redistributed into the EU, because this would give a trade advantage to GB for trade negotiation. What it really does is it prevents Northern Ireland manufacturers having access to the same raw materials and the same supply chains as their GB competitors. It became more worrying whenever DAERA and DEFRA and HMRC appeared to know nothing about this a week later in the supply chain meeting. So I went to one of the senior DAERA officials in Northern Ireland, and he clearly told me that on the other issue I've raised about rest of the world lamb consignments, the issue's triangular trade, the EU Commission have confirmed that the movement of rest of the world products such as New Zealand lamb into GB and then into NI-EU is prohibited unless the consignments further processed in GB. Further processed requires a sufficient level of processing. So, for example, slicing would not be deemed to be sufficient. It has to change. It has to have a substantive change. The official confirmed that entry has been refused to unprocessed rest of the world consignments, but also raised a concern by commenting that we are still permitting the movement of rest of the world processed products through GB, providing that they're certified and accompanied by the old version of the meat EHC. At this stage, he could not confirm how long that trade would be permitted to continue for. That created a real concern in us. I contacted DEFRA directly because there was nothing sent out to traders. And there's a lot of trade at stake here. There's a lot of business at stake here. This isn't, let's get this into context. In a day, the headlines are about the importation of Russian coal into Belfast, given the horrific events that are happening in Ukraine. And it's deemed to be legal. We're actually talking about 2 weeks ago it being illegal to move Australian, New Zealand pork and beef from Britain into Northern Ireland. So that just sets a context for where this is at. We pressed DEFRA on the issue, and I have pages of notes of the correspondence back and forth with DEFRA, and they actually confirmed the position in the next Northern Ireland GB supply chain meeting that these products were, the EU had said these products cannot come into Northern Ireland and therefore were prohibited. I challenged back on that and I asked, well, if that's the case, how does this affect retail? And I think whenever the penny dropped and it affected the New Zealand lambs, chops that everybody has in their shops and things like that, that could not then be certified under Stanley's, DEFRA at ministerial level had to intervene and change the UK position in this. It hasn't given comfort in the long run here because the position has only changed, and the notice from DEFRA that changed this clearly only states whilst the ongoing negotiations are in place, this is being permitted. So this has had a chilling effect on the supply chain between Britain and Northern Ireland. Because if you're somebody who's running a contract to move these sort of goods, to put them into, say for example, a ready meal to compete with your GB competitors for a UK contract, the GB competitor has access to these goods. You don't know if you are going to have or if you're not going to have. So that is a really difficult position for manufacturers to be placed in. And again, this all happened during a period of standstill. I'm aware of a series of communications between the UK Chief Veterinary Officer and our European counterpart, where the EU was very uncompromising on this issue. But the concern for hauliers is that we need to know in advance if something's going to change. It's no good whenever we're in load 3, 4 or 5 turning up at the port to find out that it has to go all the way back to Britain under a TARP notice. The factory's expecting the goods. They're screaming at us saying, where are the goods? And we're explaining to them that something has changed that we didn't know about and nobody appears to know about. So I hope that answers your question, Chair, but I'm happy to take any.
Yes, no, I think it's very useful, those scenarios, Peter, to be honest. I'm going to obviously open up now for other members who have their names down for questions here. Mr. Boylan, Mr. Muir, Mr. Beggs at the minute. Mr. Boylan first. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, and thank you for your presentation. John, just one question in terms of, and I've listened now, we've been given a comprehensive briefing there from both gentlemen. What discussions have you had with the British government in relation to addressing the concerns that the two gentlemen has raised, and with Europe as well?
We have had a number of discussions, Chair, with UK government officials, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and a number of ministers is working to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in relation to our concerns. So this has been articulated through to the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and her predecessor Lord Frost. So they are fully aware of our concerns. Our concerns are well documented. We have attempted, Chair, to reach out to the Commission on a number of occasions. We're not part of the Northern Ireland Business Brexit Working Group. We have attempted to gain access to that group, and we have been unable to gain access for one reason or another. So we have reached out for meetings to the European Commission in relation to our concerns, but again, we have not been successful, Chair, in relation to engaging with the Commission.
So clearly, at present, John, what you're saying is the British government is not doing anything to support these businesses through these current problems we're facing at the minute.
Well, if you're talking, Chair...
No, I'm only asking, I mean, because I've listened intently, because I'm getting different versions of it. We know the businesses, there's some businesses operating here and don't see any challenges. So I'm only listening to the presentation, what I got this morning, and clearly there's major problems for these two businesses that's present in front of us and others. So I'm just saying the discussions and conversations you're having, obviously we as a committee want to try and help out. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding, you know, who's trying to help and who's trying to progress and who's trying to cut down some of the barriers that some of the businesses are facing. Yeah. That's all I'm trying to get at, you know.
Yeah, well, say we have made our points clear to the British government in relation to not only their concerns in relation to the increasing fuel costs, red diesel changes, and in relation to the trading arrangements. Our points have been taken on board. The feedback from the UK government in relation to our concerns in regard to the trading arrangements is that they understand, appreciate and recognise the issues and problems that we're facing, and their solutions are similar to ours in that they want the free movement of goods between GB and Northern Ireland. We've had no feedback from the UK government in relation to our asks in respect of red diesel and a fuel duty, fuel surcharge change. We had no feedback in relation to that, but say certainly in relation to our concerns in regard to the trading arrangements, we have had positive feedback to say that they recognise the issues, and in actual fact everybody now seems to recognise the concerns, and there seems to be a willingness to try to work to a solution that addresses those concerns, but say we'll just have to wait to see what the outcome of the negotiations are.
No, and I appreciate it. And obviously, you know, the committee last week agreed to write to the Treasury, write to the British government in relation to the fuel duty and also the red diesel issue. So that's on record for us, and we're supportive of it. I'm just trying to find out, in relation to the two presentations today, there's other matters outside of that continue to challenge the industry, and I'm just trying to find out how we as a committee can engage that process, and how we can move forward. If any other members any other presentees want to comment on that, you know, because I mean it's that level of engagement we can certainly engage on your behalf. That's all.
Well, maybe you could assist us in getting engagement with the Commission, Mr. Chair, in relation to articulating our concerns in regard to the impact of the new trading arrangements, because certainly I think that's key to ensure that particularly the haulage sector and the concerns from the haulage sector are articulated and heard in Europe to ensure that they fully understand and appreciate the real issues. There's not very many hauliers that would say to me that they haven't experienced considerable issues with the movement of goods. The vast majority of hauliers would say that they're experiencing issues, additional costs, etc., as a consequence of the new trading arrangements. I think on that point, maybe my colleague Peter Summerton wants to comment.
I think thank you for the opportunity to answer that question, Chair. I think it's clear just by one fact alone, and that is that the UK government is spending more money on temporary structures to mitigate against the impact of transferring goods between Britain and Northern Ireland than the 300 millions that Stormont has currently got to spend and is struggling to find a way to spend, suggests that there are serious problems here. I think that the fact that we're 1 year on from the protocol it should have impacted on retail on the 1st of April 2021. 1 year on, we're still seeing those unilateral mitigations enforced by the UK government. So I can see very much clearly from my Irish perspective, from the movements of retail goods between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland, what the impact would be in Northern Ireland. I think I have to highlight the fact that the last few miles of retail into Northern Ireland are done between GB distribution centres and Northern Irish stores, whereas if you look at the model in the Republic of Ireland, the last few miles are done between distribution centres in the Republic and the stores, because you've got, for example, Asda, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Iceland, M&S in Northern Ireland, who are all drawing their supply chain from GB, and you have got Dunn's, SuperValu, Musgrave Group, Tesco Ireland, Aldi, Lidl, for example, all drawing their supply chain from their Irish distribution centre. So the impact's far greater for Northern Ireland, because the products are much more complex coming into Northern Ireland. They're not bulk movements. I haven't had anybody who's moving SPS goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in any forum tell me that this has not had a negative or worrying impact on their business. I think it's...
No, and Peter, I appreciate, my point is, I mean, what is the British government doing? The British establishment doing to support yourselves? But I just, you know, and that question hasn't been answered. So, I mean, we all know the political, and I don't want to get into a political debate about it. We all understand the political situation with this. My other point, John, is in terms of other inflationary pressures that's the industry's finding challenging at the minute. Would you like to comment on them, besides the fuel duty and also the red diesel? So any other inflationary issues you want to comment on, please?
Yeah, well, I think, Chair, probably the best man to speak about the inflationary pressures on the business would be Peter, given that he's the managing director of a fairly large business that not only does logistics, but it does cold storage. So, Peter, if you could maybe comment on the detail.
Yeah, I think that if you take what we do in terms of hardware, we're seeing inflationary pressures in terms of the cost of trucks, the cost of fuel, drivers' wages. They're the three main feeds into it. I think that we're seeing we're seeing a cost of shipping and movements between Britain and ports. In parallel to your previous question, we were actually calling this out, the UK government, in 2020, and saying what the problems and modelling forward what the problems were going to be, even before the protocol and Brexit controls were put in place. I think that's important to call that out, because this is logistics, it isn't politics, and we've seen where the problems were going to be. Effectively, to run goods from the south of England into Northern Ireland in 2020, we had full access to Port of Dublin, and we were able to bring those goods into Northern Ireland through Port of Dublin, and we were able to take product from Northern Ireland out through Port of Dublin. We asked for a very simple mitigation, and that would be that for any product coming between Britain and Northern Ireland through Dublin, or from Northern Ireland to Britain through Dublin, that a simple tag, a digital control tag, would be placed on the truck in Northern Ireland or GB to allow free passage through Dublin port, reduce congestion and reduce the road miles in the truck. Instead of that happening, and we have seen in 18 months from that request, no movement from Ireland, the UK or the EU to give us access to Dublin port, which is a really simple mitigation and would massively benefit Northern Ireland. We've seen no progress from anybody in that, no appetite to give Northern Ireland that advantage. We're running more diesel miles to get to Port of Kinryan. We're taking more time to get to Port of Kinryan, which is more operator time for the driver, and therefore we're inflating the cost of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So clearly, all our input costs, from power to run our cold stores, from red diesel in our fridges, from white diesel to run our trucks, the cost of the truck itself, the parts and the maintenance of the truck, the driver's wages, and the increased food miles, which used to be a subject that people used to want to reduce, have all increased in the last 12 months. We've sought to mitigate that in Ireland by over the last 5 years by putting in a food to fuel biomethane centre, which allows us to generate some of our own electricity and some of our and biomethane to power a fleet of trucks in Northern Ireland. And I would encourage the Infrastructure Committee to come and look at what we've done there and look at that green initiative of Northern Ireland source fuel, which we are in complete control of. and actually see that as a way of progressing Northern Ireland forward and mitigating against the cost of imported fuels. So I'm actually struggling to find a deflationary balance to go offset any of those inflationary costs, and a lot of them are due to a stroke of a pen.
No, fair enough, and that's why we agreed the briefing today, and thanks very much for the information, because I'm sure, like all the members of the committee, we will certainly support and try and do what we can here from this point, but I just want to get a better understanding of all the players in the game trying to assist the industry, because we know the challenges that they face. Just a final question of you, Peter, just in terms of shortages, I mean, in driver shortages in particular, I mean, would you outline the pressures you're facing there? Thank you.
Yeah. Driver shortages and driver training is something that has been the highlight of I suppose, Q4 in 2021. Whenever there was a reduction in the number of EU drivers coming into Britain, and if you like, the people from the UK and Ireland who drive trucks were in shorter supply than the number of trucks that need moved. We mitigated our way around that because we treat people with respect, and we have a favourable conditions for our drivers. And what I would say from the committee is that there would be some investment in driver training in Northern Ireland and in the actual facilities that there are for drivers to use, so that drivers could be encouraged into the sector. That's very important. I've heard commentary in some of the meetings I have in the Republic of Ireland where there's a keenness to bring in drivers from war-torn Ukraine or from Argentina. That's a temporary fix in this, so it is, and it isn't really right that we should rob other nations of a very valuable resource. We need to sort this out ourselves, and we need Northern Ireland Infrastructure Committee to be very aware that we need to be training Northern Irish drivers. We need to make this sector attractive. We especially need to make this sector attractive to women who lose out most from the lack of facilities there are. And we're engaged with RHA in trying to open up the sector to everybody that would like to apply and be involved.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Muir.
Thanks very much, Chair. Something wrong with this camera, it's not appearing. Just a simple question around the driver shortages. What more would you want to see being taken forward from the Department of the Economy and also the Department of Infrastructure in relation to that?
Well, I think if I could comment, Mr. Chair, in relation to that, the provision of HGV driving tests within the Driver and Vehicle Agency, we had difficulty initially getting them to accept that there was, let's say, a lack of capacity within the test centres for doing HGV tests. That has been addressed to some extent, but I think there needs to be a renewed focus to make sure going forward that they have the capacity. I'm still receiving calls on a regular basis from some of the training companies to say that they're having difficulty getting the slots in relation to HGV driving tests. As Peter has alluded to, one of the big issues from a driver perspective is the facilities. And Northern Ireland in itself is relatively small. We've had some reasonably good facilities built on the likes of the M1 or the M2 there with the Apple Green facilities. A lot of Northern Irish hauliers transit into GB, and the facilities in GB currently are not fit for purpose. If the committee could apply some pressure to the government in GB to up the standard or to have some basic standard for the facilities for drivers in GB, it would certainly enhance and attract more drivers, particularly, as Peter says, lady drivers, because they're very much underrepresented in the sector. But if you can't provide suitable facilities, and if you look across Europe at the facilities that's provided in Europe for drivers, facilities particularly in GB are extremely poor. So some support for that would be welcome.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, you
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry about this camera. I think it doesn't seem to be working.
No, you're fine. Mr. Beggs?
Good morning, gentlemen, and thanks for your evidence to date. I'm quite concerned that instead of looking at reducing the bureaucracy. I'm hearing of potential new bureaucracy in terms of paperwork being required for goods moving not only from GB to Northern Ireland, but from now, for some point in the future, from Northern Ireland to GB in terms of some sort of goods passports being required. So I have to say I am really alarmed about that. That will add costs further. You mentioned in terms of the trader support services that it's been temporarily funded by HMG. When is the funding due to finish, and what do you expect the annual cost to be when that comes to an end?
We had a meeting with, Chair, we had a meeting with DEFRA, HMRC and TSS colleagues, because whenever we're doing our business plan as a company, we're obviously going out 5 years in terms of forecast, 3 years in terms of planning right down to trucks, because at the minute there would be a at least 12-month waiting list with most of the manufacturers on diesel trucks. So therefore we need to be forecasting way ahead. We actually asked the question, and it was Mr. Singham from TSS who answered it by saying that the contract currently with TSS is a 2+1 contract, and if that year was extended, which it's likely to be, he would see it moving to, his exact words were, intermediate market solutions at the end of that. If I give you an idea of where costs would be there, in 2020 it costs, say, £100 to move a pallet from the south of England to Northern Ireland. The customs paperwork that would come with that would be maybe £70 and maybe £100 on a mixed pallet. And in addition to that, if you had to put a health cert on it, the government has currently capped health certs at £150. So you could actually have twice the amount of cost involved in the administration of that pallet as what the actual movement of the pallet costs in terms of the haulier. That's a model that I'm suggesting based on groupage being, one pallet groupage being doable in 2020. Under the current movements, it is actually so difficult to move one pallet of groupage like that those movements are already under strain, even without there being the additional costs of the customs declaration and the health cert. So I can only suggest that would be a chilling effect to the point of freezing effect on that trade. It would be very hard to find a couple of £100 of margin in a pallet for many of the GB shippers.
I have to say it's very worrying in terms of trade, both east-west and west-east. In terms of alternatives such as trusted traders, whereby if goods are maintained in Northern Ireland or an insurance can be given that they're not going to be destined for moving on to the EU, that seems to me to be a light touch method of avoiding all this bureaucracy. So my question is, are you aware of any discussions around that type of practical solution so that EU will be able to protect their single market without, frankly, adding huge administrative burdens to businesses and consumers in Northern Ireland?
Sure. There is, in terms of the EU non-paper, I'm not aware of enough detail around the conversations between UK government and the EU on how that non-paper would filter out. In the original piece that we all have access to, it really suggests that there will be a lighter touch at ports, but that the controls and challenges actually move further upstream and they move on to the UK manufacturer or the supplier to make sure that the goods are actually conforming at source to EU. So rather than being checked and having the costs at ports, it's likely that those costs are going to be moved upstream. We'll have to do a reality check on that. Northern Ireland is 1.8 million of the nearly 70 million that live in the UK. Like, we're 2% of the market. If we're really going to ask UK companies to do something different for 2% of their market, I'd be concerned about that. I would suggest that's That's likely to be something that looks good on paper, but whenever, like many of these things have done, whenever you actually put them onto the road and put the tyres in the road like we have to do, those things just don't happen. They don't work.
Sorry, Mr. Beggs, if you don't mind. You mentioned trusted trader schemes, and just alluded to Peter's argument there about the EU non-papers, which were released last year. If you delve down into them, the trusted trader scheme only applies to retail. So for the operations that I work in, which is mainly commercial, they don't apply at all. So the trusted trader scheme for many small businesses will not apply. And as Peter alludes to there, the issues have been pushed upstream. So from the police point of view, it doesn't mean that we will have to stop any of the paperwork, the custom declarations that we do at the minute. We will still have to complete them. So that means we cannot, if the argument is that the EU says, well, we'll provide less checks in Belfast Port, it doesn't mean we can't remove the administrative cost of administering that process. We still have to complete the custom declarations, whether it be whatever form they present it to us in. That's a cost we will have to pass on to our customers.
Can I ask, have you came across other businesses that have basically stopped supplying to Northern Ireland? Because I know in terms of particularly smaller goods, frequently I've identified items on websites and went ahead to order, and then you discover increasingly do not supply Northern Ireland. Have you yourselves, in terms of the businesses that you interact with, seen that issue? And again, if this bureaucracy and costs increase, do you see other such suppliers taking that as a route out rather than simply passing huge costs on, which they know our customers will not pay?
Just maybe if I could comment initially, Chair, on a meeting that I was at 2 weeks ago whenever they were talking about the issue in regard to triangular trade. So this was a meeting that there was in the region of 200 people. It was a virtual meeting with over 200 people rather. And there was businesses on that call that whenever they heard the detail that was being proposed through the triangular trade issue, that they said that they would have to seriously review their business activity in Northern Ireland because this would decimate their business. And so that's one very recent example of whereby triangular trade could have a significant impact on businesses within Northern Ireland. And I'll hand over to Peter, Chair, if you don't mind, in relation to some other examples.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair. I think that without trying to overstate the situation here, I can't think of any other region of the world where a trade restriction placed in one direction is actually a trade agreement. And effectively for Northern Ireland PLC, we want to be able to ship goods freely to Great Britain, whilst there are constraints on moving those goods from Britain to Northern Ireland. We've seen what happens whenever you break the circular movement of the supply chain around COVID, when all of a sudden the supply chain between China and the UK was affected and container traffic started to build at UK ports because they simply weren't going back. And we've seen a massive inflationary pressure on sea containers coming into the UK, coming into Northern Ireland. It's very important for Northern Ireland business that there's a balance of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because we don't put things in envelopes, we put them in trailers, and they're very costly to move if there's no goods in them and they're empty and there's no revenue being collected by them. Whenever you look at the triangular trade position, whenever you look at the impact that the removal of the Stanley scheme, for example, would have, they would all have negative impacts in the flow of trade between Britain and Northern Ireland. That would have a very serious impact on Northern Ireland costs out, because the outward leg of the journey would have to be at more cost than it currently is. I have one example in front of me, just to give you a clear example of this sort of thing. This is a person who imports palliative care ready meals into Northern Ireland. These are meals that are ground down to less than 1 millimetre, and they're composite meals. And the EU legislation isn't designed to allow these type of products to move, because it's meant to protect and put a curtain around the single market. So effectively these are coming from GB to Northern Ireland. This is the amount of paperwork being associated with one of the shipments. And we have had TARP notices, which are basically return to sender or destroy notices served by Belfast Port, because someone has got one of the numbers in one of the boxes wrong, and they won't allow a single letter of amendment. And the frustrating thing for me as a haulier is I have boxes of certs that aren't even taken off drivers at the ports, where I can find exactly the same thing and exactly the same errors in place. So it really depends if you get stopped, and if you get stopped with somebody that wants to go through the fine detail. With pallet of fish and chip meals being returned to GB, I think 3 shipments have failed over the last couple of weeks. And that's where I re-emphasise the fact that this is a regional economy. This is the last few miles. Our movements are extremely complex. We will have more checks in Belfast than Rotterdam. And whenever Mr. Selkovich comments that we've got jam on both sides of the bread, as a Northern Ireland haulier, I can confirm we have a sticky mess. And I think they maybe translate as the same things. This is a sticky mess we're having to deal with.
Just a final brief question. Previously, when you were dealing with COVID and the trade restrictions as well. I'm hoping that we're largely out of COVID. And are you able now to indicate what trade levels are east-west and west-east, and how they compare to trade before all of this happened and before COVID? And to what extent is movements of goods from the Republic of Ireland having an impact on that, which would not naturally have come this way in the past?
I think, Chair, if I could maybe comment on that initially. Anecdotal information from the sector indicates that a lot of freight has moved from going straight Holyhead to Dublin through Northern Ireland to avoid the more onerous checks that there is at Dublin port. I was speaking to a ferry company this week, and their concern is about the unbalance of trade, in that there's significant drop in freight moving from GB to Northern Ireland, and you still have the same demand for freight moving from Northern Ireland to GB. So that lack of circular movement will have an impact not only on the efficiencies of the haulage companies, but also on the efficiencies of the ferry companies. But certainly anecdotal information from the sector would indicate that freight volumes in the Northern Channel is holding up, but it's holding up as a consequence of Southern Irish freight that's coming through Northern Ireland to go to back to Southern Ireland, or come from Southern Ireland through Northern Ireland to go to GB. Sure, Peter wants to comment. Yeah,
I can supply you with a set of figures that are independently monitored on shipments across all European sea lanes. They strongly demonstrate that movements between Port of Dublin, between Port of Holyhead and Port of Dublin are down in double digits, starting with a 2, and movements into Port of Belfast are up at double digits, starting with a 2. Warren Point is also up. Larne is slightly up as well. So we're seeing more goods transferring across those northern corridors. I think the point that I would have to make to the committee is that we're a all-Ireland company operating in the Republic and Northern Ireland. In 2020, we had free movement of goods across the islands. And with those free movement of goods, we always took the shortest and most cost-effective routing. So you can be sure if anything has changed, if anything has moved, it has moved away from the most cost-effective routing towards either a longer or more costly supply chain, either through choice, such as the direct sailings that are £1,000 more and take a day longer between Dublin and Europe direct, or through people running more road miles to effectively get goods into Northern Ireland from northern ports. The other deviation we've seen there, Chair, is that product from Northern Ireland, which could have moved more cost effectively through Dublin to southern GB distribution centres, has been diverted onto the northern corridors. And if you're trying to get to Kent Cernran isn't a fantastic place to start. Holyhead is a much better place to start. So we're running more road miles on Northern Irish product due to the documentation and controls that there are. We have been told that whenever controls come in between Dublin and Holyhead, that Northern Ireland product will be treated as Union product, and we will have to certify it in exactly the same way as goods from the Republic. And that's why I asked for clarity from the Department of Infrastructure and from DERA as to what will the controls be for me in the opposite direction, where I have no clarity for goods that are moving from the Republic of Ireland through Northern Ireland to Scotland, which is the most cost-effective route for those goods. No one, and I've emails from UK, from DEFRA here, UK government cannot answer those questions at the minute. Those questions need answered before the 1st of July. No one can answer those questions.
Okay, Roy? Roy dropped off there. Okay, Liz Kimmins?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to all the speakers so far. I suppose just from the outset, and we obviously had a different presentation last week, and there's so many contrasting perspectives on the whole situation. And Peter, you summed it up well there when you talked about a sticky mess, and I think that is quite a good term for Brexit in general. It is a sticky mess, and I think we're seeing the outworkings of that here today. But you mentioned in just in one of your responses there about the 300 million that Stormont are having difficulty spending, and I think it's important because it's very relevant to the discussion we're having today. That it's, you know, the protocol has been cited as a reason for a party walking out of the executive, and that is why that money can't be spent. And I think when I hear the issues that hauliers like yourselves are facing, then the situation that we're in the Assembly is only doubly compounding that view, because certainly that money, if we had a functioning executive, could be used to try and support and offset some of the increasing challenges that you are having. Because I don't think that the withdrawal of the DUP from the executive is helping any of the issues that you're finding as a result of the protocol. So it's just to make that point, because I think it is important when you put it in context like that. And I suppose just to kind of get a perspective from yourselves, I mean, is the RHA wanting to find sort of more permanent and durable solutions that to try and address some of this within the framework of the withdrawal agreement and the protocol?
Mr. Chair, our objective is to ensure that there's unrestricted movement of goods between GB and Northern Ireland. How that's achieved is up to the UK government and the European Commission. But in essence, anything that slows down the movement of goods, increases bureaucracy, adds fatigue to the process, damages the environment because of the additional miles, we think has to be addressed to ensure that all those things are mitigated. How it's actually achieved then is entirely up to the Commission and the UK government to come to some form of agreement on that. But say our primary objective is to remove all those elements that we're currently facing that causes extreme pain for the sector.
Yeah, no, thank you, John, for that. And I suppose that kind of comes with the points that I've made previously. I suppose just, I mean, on another, because I know a lot of the other points have been covered by previous members, just on some of the other stuff around driver shortages, and I know Andrew Muir had asked a question just about the Department for Economy. I had raised this following the presentation we had last week in terms of the lack of appropriate apprenticeship schemes that are in place. So it's just to kind of get a wee bit of feedback from yourselves on that. Do you think, I mean, one of the suggestions put forward, and I've asked the Minister on this, that if schemes were expanded to be more for all ages rather than, you know, a certain age group. And I know Peter had mentioned about trying to attract more women into the industry as well. Do you think that's something that may help to address that?
Mr. Chair, certainly from an RSA perspective, anything that addresses those issues is more than welcome. However, I'm not 100% sure that apprenticeship schemes on their own will solve the problem. You've got to appreciate that a lot of the insurance companies are very reluctant to take on drivers that are less than 25 years old or have less than 2 years experience. Most people at that stage of life will have had an apprenticeship in some other business and already has a career path. So I think the issue is much bigger than just introducing apprenticeship schemes, but certainly an apprenticeship scheme would be welcome, but it's not the only solution.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, John. I mean, it's just, I suppose, looking at all the different things that could help, and how we can do that, I suppose, from an assembly perspective. And just my last question, in the briefing it said about the number of vocational driving licence holder renewals for over 70s had reached a new record in just Q1 of 2021. It's just to try and get a wee bit more information on that point, because you'd mentioned how it's a very worrying trend. So if you could elaborate a wee bit more on that. Thanks, Chair.
Well, given the average age of an HGV driver is in sort of early to mid 50s, this is not getting any better. There's a small percentage of drivers under 25. If we're going to rely on the older drivers, eventually those people will retire. And if you look at that figure alone, over 70-year-olds has reached a new high in relation to renewals. The next time those people go to renew their licence, they probably won't renew it. So you'll have a significant number dropping out of the system, but you won't have a similar number coming in at the bottom. So it's trying to make the sector more attractive to younger people, more attractive to females, and by doing that, it's just not a matter of introducing apprenticeship schemes. It's looking at all the issues and trying to address them in a package going forward, as opposed to just one element of it.
Can I just make one point, Chair, as well? I think it's important. We've answered questions here today from the McCull Iron perspective because we're sitting in Stormont. We also have equal operations in the Republic of Ireland, and I run those operations as well. And this is logistics, not politics. So we were very, 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 very keen to welcome, along with the Irish government, the checks and controls being delayed at Holyhead by UK government. We've seen that, as the Irish government did, as a welcome pragmatic step. We've been mad keen that those same pragmatic steps could be taken on movements between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I suppose to go really further than that, I think that I would encourage any members of the Infrastructure Committee, any members of the Department of the Economy, or any members of the Finance Department to actually look at what has happened between trade between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland, where those full checks are in place. Because we don't need to speculate anymore as to what the full implementation of the EU trade rules in REC North would create, because we can actually see what they have done in REC South in terms of increased costs, in terms of the number of days that it takes to get shipments across. We've one retailer that used to move goods on a day 1 for day 3 basis. Store ordered today, got its delivery effectively on Friday. That retailer is now operating on a day 1 for day 8. That's nearly impossible in a fresh supply chain. So I would encourage people, sometimes people don't like to look south for the example and south for the learnings. I would encourage everybody to look south for the learnings, because that is what the Northern Ireland Protocol, without easements, effectively creates. At the minute, the triangular trade rule, although it has been delayed for Northern Ireland, was actually introduced into the south. That means that the south cannot benefit from those products coming across from Britain. Also crustaceans, prawns and things like that all fall part of the same thing. So we need to learn, and we need to take a view on where some of these things are practiced already, so that we're not having debates or arguments and some people think this and some people think that. You can see it, you can touch it, you can hear it. All we have to do is look at Holyhead to Dublin for the reality.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And I suppose just on the back of that, that's my final point, Chair. I mean, I think that is important, and it's when I in my previous comments, I fully appreciate what you're saying about it's about logistics, not politics. I suppose the point I'm making is sometimes the political actions are having impacts or having a lack of impact in terms of resolving the issues that you're here to discuss today, and I think that's the pertinent point here. I suppose just on the last point then about you've obviously been engaging with the Dublin government as well as ourselves here in the north. Have you had any engagement with the EU or the British government over these issues as well, and trying to bring that all together then?
Mr. Chair, if I can comment. Yes, one of your colleagues asked the same question, and certainly, yes, we have had considerable engagement with UK government, with local politicians, with Irish government through the North-South Ministerial Council. All have been extremely beneficial. However, we have attempted to engage with the Commission, and unfortunately that hasn't happened at this stage, and any support that the committee can give us to get that engagement, to get the message across in relation to the impact that these things are having on the haulage sector would be very welcome.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, John and Peter, for that.
Okay, Cara Hunter.
Thank you, Chair, and just to thank you to the panel this morning. I found their briefing fantastic, just to give us a full overview of all of their issues and concerns. My question touches on essentially what Liz has said there. I'm intrigued by the lack of uptake in younger drivers, and I think there's 2 transport academies in the north in council areas, and I'm just wondering, have you had any recent discussions with council areas about the potential for this to be replicated right across? And just if you could elaborate a wee bit more on maybe why you feel that kind of demographic of under 25s. I know you touched on the insurance issue there, but why is there an apprehension? Is it the antisocial R aspect? Any information on that would be helpful. Thank you.
Certainly, if I could comment, Mr. Chair, in relation to the councils. Yes, there is a number of councils in Northern Ireland that are running schemes for drivers, and that is extremely welcome. Unfortunately, the numbers are limited, and the number of applications and the uptake was fantastic, but I say the number of places was limited, so it will have limited impact on the overall problem. We certainly would welcome additional council input in relation to this, covering all council areas. I know Belfast has a scheme, I think Banbridge and Armagh has a scheme, and I think there's a scheme in Antrim as well. So those schemes are welcome, but they're not the solution in themselves. There needs to be greater support in relation to funding given to some of the local hauliers. I know there's a number of local hauliers have schemes themselves and are very successful in bringing drivers through. But say it's not the only issue. If you look at the overall haulage sector and what drivers are expected to do, drivers are no longer just drivers, they're representatives of the company. They have to travel long distances, they have to be away from home, and social trends and social needs and domestic needs have changed, and it's no longer acceptable within certain families that the husband won't be home every night or the wife won't be home every night because they're driving a truck somewhere in GB. So the sector is changing. You'll see more regionalisation of the sector. I know of a number of local companies that have been taken over by national companies where they're trying to regionalise transport, which means that maybe a driver doesn't have to travel to GB, that they can stay at home, they can drop the trailer in Belfast, Larne or Warren Point, and the trailer can be shipped unaccompanied across to GB. So there is changes taking afoot within the sector, but one of the points that I made earlier in relation to the issue with age, a lot of the younger folk don't see driving as attractive as it used to be. They want to be home at night, they want to spend quality time with the family. COVID has really brought that to the fore, and so it isn't as attractive as it used to be. In addition to that, I'd say the issue also in relation to the insurance companies. A lot of the insurance companies are reluctant to take on drivers under the age of 25. If they do take on drivers under the age of 25, there's huge premiums that has to be paid. So a lot of companies try to stay clear of taking on the younger drivers. By the time somebody reaches the age of 25, they've got another career path. So we're not getting the same number of younger drivers coming in that we need. There's no one solution to this. I think what it needs is for government to sit down with the likes of Department for Infrastructure, Department for the Economy, Department of Finance, and look at the issues and look at a broad range of solutions designed by the sector to address the sector's needs, as opposed to designed by a civil servant imposed on the sector to solve a problem that the public sector don't really understand. So I think it needs a collaborative approach, led by government, but with significant input from the sector to address it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, we've come to the end of our time, and thank you for your presentation this morning. It's been very useful, very helpful indeed. So we wish you well, and the committee will consider some actions now after you leave as to how we can maybe help you go forward in some of the matters that's been raised today.
Sure, can I make one closing comment?
Yes,
That is that we don't want there to be any, seen as there any difference across our sector and our commentary here. The commentary last week was based on Island of Ireland traffic and how goods move across the Island of Ireland. Because that was covered last week, we've covered off goods moving between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There's no conflict between the two positions.
No.
The positions are really clear. They're examination of different trade routes. So the people who aren't having trouble moving on the island of Ireland is a statement of fact, and people who are having terrible trouble moving between Britain and Northern Ireland is equally a statement of fact.
And that's why it was so important that you came along this morning. We do very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hold on a minute.
Oh, sorry. Got ready?
Could you give us just 2 minutes? 2 minutes just before we... Just to round this up, is there any actions that are required from committee at this stage in relation to the last presentation? We have already written to the government in relation to...
That's right. The Financial Secretary of the Treasury copied to the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah, with regard to that. They did raise that we could lobby for the GB not being fit for purpose for facilities. I don't know who would write to on that now, but they did ask us if we would consider that. Any members pick anything up that they want to further communicate to any departments or anything like that at this stage?
I think, Chair, if I could just come in there, I think maybe just noting the positive uptake of the two schemes within the two council areas, and perhaps maybe if any conversations could take place to enhance that, to roll it out further, or maybe just for the Department for Infrastructure and the Department for the Economy to engage on the concerns that they had raised about driver shortages. If we could just have a wee line on that.
Yes, I had actually written that down, but below the facilities one, so that's something that we could do. Yes, have we agreed on that?
Sorry, Chair. In relation to the driver shortages, there has been an addition to the legacy report, which would be a matter, given that this is the last meeting of the committee, to put that into the legacy report, and perhaps we could add to that a line on facilities in GB that the incoming committee might want to explore.
Okay, yeah, that's
If members are content.
grand indeed. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that'll
Chair, just one final thing. So
yes.
I take it, obviously I'll go to Jim on this in here. Jim, I take it we've got a broad view right across the sector in relation to the issues that's impacting on the haulage, yeah?
Sorry, from the 2 oral evidence sessions.
Well, obviously we had a good presentation today and obviously last week. So what I'm asking really is we're content that we have a broad representation of the challenges right across the industry, yeah?
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, well, that's for the committee to
No, well,
if they're content
well, like,
with that.
that's what I'm trying to get at, because I mean, obviously, there is challenges there. You heard this morning facing the industry in terms of administrative stuff. So, as long as we feel, because this is our last meeting, and whatever goes into our legacy report, it's just for noting that we have a broad view of the challenges that's there, and the next committee, then whoever's going to be can pick up and go on from there. You know what I mean? So as long as that, I think we the last 2 briefings we had is fairly reflective right across the board. That's my reading of it. So, Chair, I'll be happy enough to get that, and as long as that's reflected in our legacy report. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Brian. Yeah.
We've heard from the 2 main trade bodies for hauliers and logistics, UK Logistics and the Road Haulage Association. So I don't know of any other representative body. They have many members, and they are both reflecting their experiences. I certainly do feel that we have had representative presentations of how hauliers and logistic operators are experiencing the difficulties at the minute as a result of a variety of things, but whether it's fuel prices or protocol and difficulties in trading. So I'm certainly comfortable that we've had a wide representation and a fair reflection of what's happening.
Okay. No, I think everybody's of the same mind at this stage. So that'll be entered into the legacy report then. Thank you. We'll move to item 11 now. It's a departmental briefing on renewable and low carbon energy review. And at page 218 there's the departmental briefing paper.
Morning.
Are we all right?
Afternoon.
Okay. Right. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
To this morning's, well, nearly afternoon now. So we have Ms. Joy Hargey, the Principal Planning Officer from the Planning Policy, and Mr. Philip McGowan, Principal Planning Officer, Planning Policy. Attending via Starleaf, Mr. Stuart Freeman, Senior Planning Officer, Planning Policy. Are we? Yes, I see Stuart on the screen there indeed. Yeah. So, again, do you want to make some opening remarks and then we'll take some questions? Or?
Yes, Chair, very much appreciate that, and good afternoon. Technically, we're probably in the afternoon at this stage, and good morning, afternoon, chairs, and thank you for the opportunity to attend today's meeting. Joy, to my right here, and myself jointly head the Department's Planning Policy team, and we're here along with Stuart via Starleaf to brief the committee specifically on our progress on the review of strategic planning policy for renewable and low carbon energy. Members will be aware that Minister Mallon announced her decision to commence this review on the 21st of April last year, and the committee will recall officials met with you previously at a meeting held on the 2nd of June. In the period since, officials have been progressing the review process as quickly as possible, together with other departmental planning policy priorities and issues. I can advise that there's been extensive engagement with DFE and steering groups on the development of their related energy strategy and action plan, and this was agreed by the Executive on the 16th of December. Work is also ongoing in relation to renewable energy policy developments in other jurisdictions, which is a necessary part of the policy development. Furthermore, the Department has completed a procurement process to secure specialist consultants to undertake a legally compliant strategic environmental assessment with the review. Officials have also progressed additional tasks for the review, including recent stakeholder engagement, which should be the focus of today's briefing from us, and work on statutory impact assessments, as well as other process requirements as per the Executive Office's policy-making toolkit. The scheduled briefing today is timely. As I've alluded to, it provides officials with the opportunity to feedback on the emerging findings arising from the recently concluded targeted stakeholder engagement exercise. On the 15th of December last year, the Department circulated an issues paper to key stakeholders for a period of 8 weeks consultation, and this closed on the 11th of February. A copy of the issues paper was presented to the committee at this time. The issues paper was also posted on the DFI website so that anyone with an interest in the review could respond. The exercise sought the views from a range of stakeholders on a number of key areas which could be a focus for change. The issues paper comprised 12 questions on 9 key policy considerations, and these are energy targets, locational considerations, siting new farms in perpetuity, wind turbines and amenity considerations, decommissioning and site restoration for new development, solar farms and agricultural land, co-locating renewable low carbon and supporting infrastructure, repowering existing wind farms, and finally views were also sought in relation to emerging technologies and any other issues. This was a pre-consultation engagement and it builds upon a call for evidence undertaken in 2016 and the independent consultant's report presented to the Department in 2018. The comments received in response to the issues paper will be taken on board going forward and are intended to further assist the Department with the drafting of revised strategic planning policy for the purposes of full public consultation. The Department received a very high level of response to this engagement exercise with 42 responses. Of these, 13 responses were from the government sector. This included responses from the Department for Economy, Department for Communities, 9 of the 11 councils and the Northern Ireland Local Government Association, and a response from DAERA is expected shortly. There were 17 responses received from business and industry interests, including Renewable NI, System Operator for Northern Ireland Limited, Northern Ireland Electricity Networks, Hydrogen NI, Irish Solar Energy and Energy Storage Ireland, as well as responses from individual developers, the Federation of Small Businesses and the Ulster Farmers Union. 3 organisations who responded are representative of environmental interests, and these are namely the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the National Trust and Sustainable NI. The Department also received 6 responses from professional bodies, including the Royal Town Planning Institute, the Irish Planning Institute, and organisations representing community interests, such as the Rural Community Network and Community Places. Finally, the Department received 3 responses from individuals. Many of the responses are detailed and require careful consideration. The necessary analysis of the responses is therefore still ongoing. However, we are pleased today to be able to provide members with an overview of the key issues and themes that are emerging. Generally speaking, the decision to undertake this pre-consultation exercise has been very well received, with those that have responded expressing gratitude for the opportunity to contribute. Overall, it is clear that there continues to be varied and contrasting perspectives on the appropriateness of the current strategic plan and policy approach. Whilst most responses raise matters relating to wind energy development, comments have also been submitted in respect of solar energy, anaerobic digestion, hydro development, geothermal and hydrogen energy, battery energy storage systems and other emerging renewables technologies. In most of the responses that have been received, there is strong support for the future policy to fully take account of the climate emergency, as well as the Executive's updated energy targets as set out in the energy strategy. However, there are contrasting views on how revised policy might address this contemporary context and how any future change in approach can best be implemented. For example, industry interests suggest that the climate emergency is the overriding consideration, and therefore, generally speaking, renewable and low carbon development should be fully supported by planning policy. The renewables industry also considered that the policy needs to be updated to reflect advancements in technologies and to provide a more flexible policy framework that is adaptable to future renewable energy approaches. However, others seek a more balanced approach to development that takes full account of our local natural and built environment and cumulative impacts, as well as amenity considerations. Respondents from the energy sector also consider that achieving the energy strategy's target of at least 70% by 2030 should not be the determining factor at the expense of the local environment. This sector considers policy should be more restrictive, particularly in our sensitive areas. I now pass over to Joy, who will address the comments generated in response to each of the other policy themes as set out in the issues paper.
Okay, so firstly, in relation to locational considerations, the renewable industry is strongly opposed to introducing a spatial approach for the identification of suitable sites for such development and/or the sites to be avoided for wind and solar energy development. The industry considers that it has the required expertise and that it is best placed to identify the suitable viable development opportunities on a site-by-site basis. In contrast, NIE, along with a number of environmental, community and local government interests, would support a spatial approach. A number of councils and NILGA consider local development plans are best placed to bring forward bespoke spatial planning policies. However, it is considered that strategic guidance and direction would assist in this process. The environmental sector consider there are benefits of bringing forward a spatial approach. However, this should be carried out in collaboration between councils, developers, communities and environmental groups in conjunction with a landscape strategy. Turning to the matter of siting new wind farms in perpetuity, industry respondents consider wind farms should be sited in perpetuity. The majority of councils in NILGA acknowledge the certainty that such an approach would provide, but are of the view that strategic policy should retain the existing time-bound approach and current policy approach on decommissioning and site restoration arrangements. They also consider strategic policy which encourages repowering would be more appropriate than siting in perpetuity. The environmental sector and some councils consider that siting in perpetuity should be avoided, as this has the potential to result in an abundance of redundant wind farms littered across the landscapes. So next, in relation to wind turbines and amenity considerations, a number of councils, DFC, Historic Environment Division, Rural Community Network and Community Places indicate support for the existing policy criteria in the SPPS, which guards against unacceptable adverse impacts on certain planning considerations, including residential amenity. In relation to acoustic measurement, the renewable energy industry consider that the use of the ETSU R97 is still appropriate for the noise assessment of turbines. And the industry also suggests that mandatory separation distances should be avoided, favouring an approach where proposals are assessed on a case-by-case basis. The industry seeks the removal of the existing separation distance of 10 times the rotor diameter to occupied property for wind farms. In contrast, local government consider the methodology is outdated and would benefit from review. Some councils, NILGA, the environmental sector and community interests consider that the current policy requirement for separation distances for wind farms is appropriate and should extend to single wind turbines as well. There is also a call for separation distances for wind farm developments to be mandatory. For decommissioning and site restoration for new development, the majority of responses from various sectors consider that the existing policy requirements for decommissioning and site restoration remain appropriate. However, some councils and NILGA indicate that there is merit in seeking financial bonds guarantees where appropriate. With regards to solar farms in agricultural land, it is recognised that solar energy is increasing. However, the industry consider that this form of technology represents a small proportion of Northern Ireland's overall renewable energy contribution. Industry suggests that non-agricultural land should not be prioritised for solar farm development and that such a policy direction could create a barrier to achieving the energy strategy's target. A range of sectors, including the renewable energy industry and agricultural sector, highlight that solar farms can operate in tandem with agricultural uses and that this form of development provides sustainable farm diversification that can enhance biodiversity. Most councils, NILGA, NIE, community groups and those with environmental interests consider brownfield sites should primarily be used to accommodate solar farm development, although a balanced approach is welcome. We also invited comments on co-locating renewable, low carbon and supporting infrastructure. There is strong support from all sectors for co-location of renewable and low carbon technologies and associated infrastructure. However, some respondents consider there is a need for a better understanding of the impacts such as amenity, safety and cumulative impact and a rigorous assessment of such proposals. The renewable energy industry highlight that co-locating solar and storage will reduce intermittency issues, reduce levels of dispatch down, will maximise utilisation of grid connections and that co-location will ultimately benefit consumers. Repowering existing wind farms attracted quite a number of comments. As previously indicated, some councils, NILGA and the industry are of the view that strategic policy should encourage repowering. The industry consider that strategic planning policy and guidance should include a clear presumption in favour of life extension of existing wind farms and look favourably on the co-location of other technologies coming forward for repowering. Some councils, NILGA and the Rural Community Network and RSPB, indicate that policy-based criteria and guidance is required for the assessment of repowering development proposals, and a number of respondents indicate that repowering should only be considered on its merits. Finally, we did invite comments on emerging technologies and other issues. Some councils and the industry reiterate that any new policy must be flexible to accommodate new and evolving technologies. Some councils in NILGA emphasise the need for a greater focus on micro-energy regeneration and for strategic policy and guidance on battery energy storage systems. A range of other comments have been received from respondents, most of which are outside the scope of this review, such as the need for a streamlined approval process, improved processing times, better resource statutory consultees, guidance, changes to existing permitted development regulations and other legislative changes, and members will be aware that a number of these matters are being taken forward in other ways, including through the review of the implementation of the Planning Act. So in relation to next steps, just thank you, Chair, for your patience in permitting the time required to provide this summary feedback, which we hope members found to be helpful. In relation to summing up, we can advise that officials will now proceed with the next steps in the policy review process. This will include completing the detailed analysis of the responses received to this targeted engagement exercise, which will be fully taken into account in moving forward. Where appropriate, there will be further engagement with a number of key stakeholders, and officials are also exploring the possibility of undertaking some study visits of local renewable development schemes to increase the Department's understanding of the key issues to be taken into account in formulating the revised strategic planning policy. An SEA scoping report will shortly issue to consultation bodies for the statutory 5-week period, and the Department will thereafter proceed with the process of drafting the revised strategic planning policy, which is required to be assessed for environmental and other impacts in accordance with the environmental legislation and established policy making best practice. Following ministerial agreement, it is expected that a draft revised strategic planning policy will be issued for full public consultation then later in the year. So that is the end of the Department's oral briefing. The Department is very keen to hear members' views, which will obviously take on board in next steps, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Given that the call for evidence was in 2016, what has been the delay for so long?
Well, in some ways, you're right to point out that that was undertaken some time ago. So the Department said that there was some merit, and as I said earlier, it was well received in terms of that pre-engagement. The context has changed quite a bit. There's quite a significant range of developments, and indeed technologies have moved on as well. So the Department felt it was necessary to assist with, I suppose, ultimately getting the best outcomes for strategic development policy to actually go out and do a targeted, like a limited engagement. Really, as much as anything, to help us with getting this right in terms of our next steps to revise planning policy. Obviously, we've had the energy strategy out there. There's developments in regards to the first environment strategy for Northern Ireland, green growth strategy. So it was very important to take cognizance of where we're at now. And 2016 is a good few years ago, but the pace of change is very significant, so we really think that's valued, and I suppose it's typified by both the number and the depth of the responses we've received, and we do think it will really add value to the work of the Department going forward.
Thank you. We'll go to some of the members then. Mr. Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for coming along. And sorry, such a comprehensive update in relation to what's been undertaken. It's really appreciated. Just a couple of things. See the siting new wind farms in perpetuity. Could you maybe tell us what the pros and cons are around that in relation to the proposals concerning that?
Well, thank you for the question. In relation to siting in perpetuity, it really is all of the issues that we put forward in the issues paper were from comments received previously in relation to the call for evidence and the previous consultant's report. So it was really good to explore these areas further. Siting in perpetuity came up as an issue whereby existing wind farms or sites already used for certain developments could remain in that use as if the principle of that land use had been established on an ongoing basis. So Again, there are probably two sides to this. Some people are saying that would be a good thing. However, by and large, it appears that most comments were that repowering, supporting policy for repowering would actually be more favourable to siting in perpetuity. Some of the concerns about siting in perpetuity would be that if there had been concerns from the actual development during its lifetime, that it didn't necessarily need to be approved again going forward, and if there were any particular issues. So those were the sort of balance. But as I say, on balance, overall, the responses seem to favour the repowering over the siting in perpetuity.
Thank you, because that's important. And the next question was about repowering, so you probably answered that in terms of the relationship with that. As you know, the Assembly last week passed the Climate Change No. 2 bill, and that now be going forward for royal assent. How will that legislation impact upon the work you're doing in relation to this?
Well, I think obviously we're very aware of that. As Philip has mentioned, we have been very closely engaged with DFE officials during the development of the energy strategy itself, and understanding what all the issues are around the wider context, the need for greater levels of renewable deployment here. We have been very successful in reaching over the 40% by 2020, but of course we don't want to stop there. But we also do want to get that balance of what is right for Northern Ireland, what are the right technologies, what are the right locations, that we don't, so that is what's coming strongly through in the responses. Everybody recognises the need in relation to the climate emergency, but it's just how do we get that balance right for Northern Ireland, protect designated landscapes? Is there a trade-off there? What developments do in relation to the targets? So net zero carbon emissions by 2050, along with the at least 70% by 2030 in the energy strategy, are all very relevant as to how we might get there. We know that the action plan from the energy strategy as well is very important. We have certainly asked DFE officials to engage with us on developing a supportive scheme that they're looking at through this year. They hope to consult on that later this year. So obviously any implications for a supportive financial scheme for such developments could have implications for the planning system. And we would very much want to work collectively across government, in relation to that, in order to meet the targets.
Yeah, one of the things is that this review is obviously welcome, but some of the concerns are around the timescales, because it needs to give certainty for the industry in terms of making investment decisions. Can you give some certainty in relation to the timescales associated with this, and is every effort going to be made to ensure that things are, moved along at pace?
In relation to this review specifically, we are very much trying to expedite it as quickly as possible. But again, as Philip said, we did think there was value going out to engage specifically on the issues paper, just to focus in on some of the updated issues that have happened since 2016. But we are meeting with the SEA consultants next Tuesday, and that is going to move on to getting the scoping report issued, which is a necessary step in the policy development. And then it will be very much down to getting the policy drafted for ministerial clearance to put out to public consultation. So we're very much focused that we are trying to move this forward as quickly as possible. And of course, the final version of the policy will be for executive committee agreement as well.
And just to add to that, in some ways, I suppose, yes, there's a process to follow, and it's very better experience has told us that it's imperative that for the good outcomes that we follow due processes, we do this rigorously and we get it right to avoid the risk of legal challenge. For no doubt with all policy, it's often very emotive. There's strong opinions on both sides, those in favour of, those opposed to. So obviously in doing this right, which we will do, and we're committed to doing as quickly as possible, but we're also cognizant that we cross the I's and dot the T's so that we do minimise any risk of successful legal challenge.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Boylan. Mr. Boylan, Cathal Boylan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. Obviously, groups have been calling for the prioritisation of green projects. In light of the climate emergency, Jerry, any commentary around that and what we're trying to do? What will this consultation achieve in trying to meet those targets?
Well, I mean, as I say, I think it is very important that we have the right strategic planning policy framework. Obviously, councils are responsible for bringing forward the development plans and taking account of the strategy and the framework that's going to be set out in this new policy associated with the SPPS. Yes, a number of people have raised the issue of fast tracking or ensuring that green applications are processed as quickly as possible. The processing itself is outside of the remit of this particular piece of work, in relation to the strategic policy. But obviously that is something that's very much focused on in relation to the recommendations that have come out of the review of the implementation of the Planning Act. And so there's a number of steps in there that very much will help to improve processing times for all applications, including for renewable energy. So it is in that context that we would, hope that is going to improve as well. And of course, we have to look as well at the last statistics that were published for the second quarter there, up to the end of September. There were 19 renewable energy applications decided, and 18 of them were approvals. So that was 94.7% approval rate. So it's also very important. I know that we do have a tendency in Northern Ireland to work a lot with developers and get schemes over the line, which maybe is not as fast as other places, but the approval rate is quite significant as well. So it's just taking all those factors into account. Make sure the quality of applications coming in, which is some of the recommendations of the Act, the quality of the applications coming in is right, that statutory consultee response times are improved, and considering penalties and things for that as well, and reduce the maybe the amount of information coming in to planning appeal scenario, etc., as well as the IT system. So there's a lot of those other things, as well as all the work in the planning forum and improving statutory consultee response times going on, that we would certainly hope will improve the overall performance of such applications.
No, I appreciate that. Just in terms, and you did mention the local development plans, I mean, in the absence of them, I mean, what guarantees can we give, that these projects move forward? That's one question. I mean, because there's estimation now that these LDPs won't be in place for a number of years, and a lot of concerns. I mean, and even the very nature of fast tracking, probably not a good terminology, because the process has to be right. But there's certainly things we can do to definitely move the programme on in terms of checks and balances. That's my only fear, would definitely be the LDPs wouldn't be here in place in time. The other question would be, and I'm interested to hear, just in terms of some of the consultation responses, I mean, obviously the likes of UFU and their views on what they've said and what they've commented on, please.
Well, in relation to the local development plans, I mean, at the minute, they're obviously taking account of the renewable energy policy that currently exists in the SPPS. Now, people could have different views. We would say that it also is quite supportive of renewable energy development. It has enabled the deployment of all of the technology which has happened to date, which at an average, I think, end of September again, was around 42% of all electricity consumed was from renewable sources. But of course, on particular days, we had a particularly windy February, and on a particular day, there was over 100% of the power used in Northern Ireland was consumed from renewable sources, and some of that was then able to be exported. So, I would say that the planning system has helped to facilitate a lot of that. The LDPs will be that are being prepared at the moment will look at take account of the existing policy. However, we want to ensure that the policy can be improved where it needs to be improved, and that is taking account of the new technologies, the repowering, and looking at that balance, that taking into account the comments that are coming back. So it's not that we're in a vacuum scenario. This would be to improve in the future. In relation to the response from the Ulster Farmers Union, particularly, again, I suppose it recognises the input of the farm diversification. I mean, most of the I think there was over 770 renewable energy applications since 2015, since powers were transferred to local government by and large. And a significant number of those, the majority, were for single wind turbines. And I know that the Ulster Farmers Union in particular sees the benefit in farm diversification around solar and wind turbines and things like that. So again, we'll be taking all of those comments on board as we move forward to the next step.
And just finally, then, thanks very much for the responses. Just in terms of how the review of the Planning Act will marry up with, you know, any energy reviews or anything that's going forward, I mean, have you any early indications how we move that process, or is there any responses in relation to that, or can you comment on that, please?
Sorry, Cathal, I just didn't get the start of that question. Apologies.
Yeah, you see we've done the review of the Planning Act itself there, right? And how does it marry up? Were there any early suggestions how it's going to drive forward any aspects of the new, you know, the energy review or energy policies that's coming forward?
Well, there are a couple of particular things, and one in particular is that one of the recommendations is to review the development management regulations. So that will be in relation to the thresholds of development. So the thresholds for renewable energy at the minute are over 5 megawatts is a major application. Obviously that then relates to your pre-application consultation requirements, etc. for developments. And then over 30 megawatt developments are considered as to whether or not the department should deal with those as regionally significant developments. There's other issues around thresholds in relation to battery energy storage and particular matters around certain technologies. So that will all be considered, you know, it's relevant to renewable energy. It's not specific to this review. In addition, there is also going to be a review of permitted development regulation in relation to low carbon heat technology. So that's your things like your geothermal for, you know, householder development and your air source heat pumps and things like that. So the micro energy side of things as well has been raised in comments, and I suppose it is important that we consider the micro generation contribution as well as the significant scale of wind farms and solar farms, etc. As well.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Liz Kimmins.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I'll keep mine brief, just I know there's been quite a lot to get through. I suppose, you know, in terms of if we're going to successfully decarbonise, we do need a more effective and efficient planning system. And I know slow processing times for applications is a major factor in this. We had a stakeholder previously who's involved in the renewables industry, and they'd informed the committee that the fastest planning decision in the north took 2.5 years. And after that, the next quickest was 4 years. Whereas in the south of Ireland, you know the date you will receive your decision on the day you make your application. So, and that's usually within a year. So it is very obvious that we need more efficiency in the system. Was this something that came up during the pre-consultation process?
Will I handle it? Yeah, very much so, and thanks for the question. Yes, obviously, this exercise is really looking at the framework, so that the right framework is available to allow the plan system to make a continued contribution to the delivery of renewables. Separate exercises or work streams are in hand in relation to, I suppose, the recognition of the need to accelerate or improve performance of the system overall, and Joy would have alluded to quite a number of those. So it's not something more specifically looking at as part of this exercise, but obviously in the widest context, it's important that the framework's right, but also that improvements are made, not just the policy going forward, but in terms of the ability to successfully deliver these applications through the system in a timely fashion. Because it strikes me, and I'm sure members will recognise, 2030 is not that long away. So, you know, anything that can be done needs doing if we are to reach those ambitions.
Can I just add that, I mean, I know that the approval rates were one thing, but in relation to the Q2 statistics, the average processing time for renewables had reduced to, I know it's still not ideal, it's 44 weeks. It's, you know, it's too long. We recognise that. That's what all these improvements are hoping to achieve as well. But we do think, and we have been talking with stakeholders, including Renewable, NI and DFE, and the importance around public acceptance, because obviously it's the planning system where a lot of the conflicts and tensions first arise. So the more that can be done to engage with local communities early doors, to really try and get public acceptance and buy-in. There does seem to be the public acceptance at a strategic level in terms of supporting to address the climate change emergency, but it's when it comes to the local environment and the concerns about specific sites or specific technologies near to communities, that's where the issues seem to bite. So that wider conversation that is being had around the climate change bill and also the energy strategy, I think is very important in the planning context too.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. I mean, as I mentioned there, just in comparison with the South, it might be worth even looking at how they manage it in that area as well, in terms of engagement with the community and working to get things done in a timely fashion, because I do think we need to be able to provide greater certainty to developers and to the public. So that's a key part of that, and it might be worth looking at as well. I suppose just the only other question I really had was to see, were there any other issues raised that during the consultation that could be taken up and acted on quickly by the department, or do you think it is just more the longer term issues that the department needs to look at?
I suppose there were many and varied and complex issues raised specifically through the responses, but I suppose our focus is on this piece of work is to get the strategic policy right. There may be other issues around asks of guidance, supporting guidance that might be helpful, as I say, changes to the processing to improve processing times, etc. But I suppose we'll work to try and get the strategic framework that is, right and fit for purpose going forward as soon as possible. And I suppose that would be our focus at the minute.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, are you okay there? You're happy enough to listen in? Nothing you want to add, Stuart?
No, nothing really.
Good man.
Just possibly one point on the back of what Joy was saying in terms of the processing times. It's obviously been raised quite a lot by industry and business to the consultation. But just on the flip side of that, some responses from the environment and community sector consider that the introduction of a spatial approach may actually help improve certainty and the community buy-in and may ultimately help improve processing times. So that's just something on the flip side to be mindful of, and obviously we'll consider all responses in moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. There's no further questions, so Joy, Philip, thank you for bringing us up to date this afternoon on the situation, and we look forward to following its progress as we go along. Thank you for coming in. Obviously, in fact, only here, there's none of the members here, so always good to see others coming in, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you too, Joy. Many's a Monday night in Carrick Council Chamber.
They could have been long meetings. That's right. Thank you. Good to see you.
Birthday girl today too.
Oh boy.
It's too modest to say.
I'll have a good day.
Thank you.
She kicked me in with it.
Okay, bye. Okay, members, thanks for that. Item 12, Committee for Infrastructure Committee Legacy Report, 2017 to 22. Jim, where are we with that now?
Chair, the issues that members brought up last week have been added to the report. Now, if members look at the very end of the future items, which, if I can find it, get the page number for members now.
230.
It's the report starts at 2:30, but the future items starts at page 265.
Okay.
So they were mostly brought last week. The final one was the HGV driver shortage. So members will see at page 270, 269, 270, a couple of paragraphs have been added there. Following today's oral evidence, I have been drafting an additional paragraph, maybe to slot in at the end of members of content, to state that the committee noted with concern that the shortage of HGV drivers is exacerbated by the gender imbalance in the sector. The committee was informed that the gender imbalance would be difficult to resolve whilst appropriate infrastructure and facilities are not in place, especially throughout GB, to meet the needs of female drivers. The successor committee may wish to explore what more could be done to encourage more women to consider HGV driving as a career.
Okay, members happy with that addition? Content?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, Carly, have we mentioned that the other issue that's been raised is in terms of imbalance, that it's not attractive to young people as well? I mean, I'm content with about the gender imbalance, but we've been given a very strong message that it is not attractive to young people. So have we specifically mentioned that?
I think that came from the guys themselves on the fact that they themselves would not, due to insurance purposes and various things, engage on anybody under 25. So while we can dance up and down in the head of a pin on it, we're not really doing about it. But if you want to put it in, it's fine.
No, I'm not talking about 18-year-olds driving HGV drivers. The issue, one, is we've been told a growing 70-year-olds driving HGV drivers, and the average age being 55. So I'm looking at new drivers coming into the profession, whether it's the 25, no, it's younger drivers. It's not 18-year-olds. I have no, I understand the practical insurance issues there, but it's just the average age being 55 means that there is a dearth of younger people, whether it's 25 plus, who are coming into the sector.
Well, we can put a line in on that. That's the wishes of the committee.
So if members are content for the final sentence to read, the successor committee may wish to explore what more could be done to encourage both more women and more younger people to consider HGV driving as a career.
How's that? All right?
Content.
Okay. Good. Anything else on that? Item 12? Okay. Item 13 is...
Members are content then with the report,
yes.
Subject to the amendments.
Yes, the amendments, please. Item 13, any other business?
One item, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, just come right to, I've got some expressions of concern from the school bus sector in terms of the rising costs and the impact. Maybe come right to DFI and also education to see if there's any supports out there for them. They're finding it very challenging, obviously at the minute because of the rise in fuel costs, maybe.
Okay. Members agree?
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you.
And any tips for Cheltenham would be welcome as well if any members have
Well,
tips for Cheltenham.
After the first one yesterday, I went downhill badly. Item 14, obviously, date and time of next meeting will not be here, so that passes us by. So the meeting is now adjourned, and just to remind members to, well, it's only myself here, supposing the staff, so socially distance on our way out. Thank you, members.
Okay, Chair. Slán.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly Committee Room 30. This is